We want to thank everyone for joining today for this press conference on the recently announced and abrupt changes to the FEMA rules that are jeopardizing New York's safe reopening. We have Borough President Adams and Civil Rights Attorney Norman Siegel on the call. To members of the press, just want to remind you just to remain muted while the Borough President and Mr. Siegel are speaking. We will, of course, open it up to questions once the speaking program is over. The meeting is being recorded, so I will ensure for those who are not able to roll on it, particularly TV and radio stations, that a recording is sent out following the press conference. But with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think first we'd like to hear from and then the Borough President, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Jonah, you want me to begin?
Yes, if you're comfortable.
No, I'm sorry. I'll start, Norman, and you could go over the technical aspects of it, okay?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Norman. Throughout the years, whenever there are legal issues that needs a level of clarity, I have reached out to Civil Rights Attorney Norman Siegel, and we spoke yesterday about the announcement that took place on September 2nd, where FEMA announced a new policy that will limit what the agencies will help states pay for as part of the COVID-19 response. Everyone is aware that New York City, for the most part, our numbers are low, and we want to keep those numbers low, and it really entails support from the federal government through FEMA. According to the new interim policies set to begin September 15, the federal agency is changing what it considers eligible as an emergency protective measure in emergencies and disasters declarations for its pandemic response. The new policy is making state and local officials worried about how to pay for critical protective equipment, including masks, as we prepare to reopen schools and businesses. It will also effectively cut hundreds of millions of dollars to sanitize schools, subways, and public facilities amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This is clearly concerning for New Yorkers, where our subway system is a major part of the infrastructure and opening businesses, moving our commuters to and from a school, place of employment, or other daily activities, to be unable to continue to clean our subway systems routinely as we're doing during the evening hours will have a major impact on the reopening of the city. We cannot allow this misguided policy to jeopardize our reopening efforts, especially with schools set to reopen in a number of weeks. Our parents have made it clear that safety of the children, the staff at our schools is clearly crucial to the reopening and the confidence in the city. That is probably the number one thing that I'm hearing as I move around the city, is that residents must have the confidence that their children and their families will be safe as we go through the reopening process. That's why today we're calling on the city and state to file a lawsuit against FEMA under the Administrative Procedure Act, which prohibits federal agencies that is arbitrary and capricious and abuse of discretion or otherwise not in accordance with the law. Attorney Norman Siegel is going to explain clearly why we believe that we are in violation, the federal government through FEMA is in violation, and what actions we believe the city should take at this time. What we do here in New York City is being watched closely around the entire globe. We cannot allow a resurgence of the virus after making so much progress, and we must ensure our city, state, and federal agencies are coordinating in lockstep with each other to prevent of what has happened in the past, lack of communication, lack of clarity, lack of financial support. I think that a lot of this action may be due to the tensions between local governments, and maybe even politics is at play. We can't use our federal agencies as schoolyard bullies to prevent our cities from reopening and preventing the resurgence of coronavirus. Again, I want to thank Attorney Norman Siegel, and I'm going to turn it over to him at this time to give a further explanation on how we feel the city should move forward. Norman?
Thank you, Borough President Adams. Administrative Procedure Act, specifically Section 706, subsection 2, prohibits, as the Borough President said, federal agency action that is arbitrary, capricious, an abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law. New York City and New York State should consider using this section of the APA to challenge FEMA's change in its rules, cutting funds to the operation of schools and other public facilities. We are talking about the cleaning of our schools, subways, which are being done to protect the health and well-being of fellow New Yorkers during the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to fight back and to go to federal court and challenge FEMA's change in its rules. This rule is supposed to go in effect in 10 days on September 15th. That gives the Corporation Council's lawyers, 900 strong, and the Attorney General's office on the state, which will give us way over 1,000 lawyers, to go into the federal court and ask for a temporary restraining order to enjoin the enforcement of this change of rules. Let me tell you what Section 706.2, which has been on the books for over 50 years. It says that the reviewing court shall hold unlawful and set aside agency action, findings, and conclusions found to be A, arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law. B, contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity. C, in excess of statutory jurisdiction. D, without observance of procedure required by law. E, unsupported by substantial evidence. The standard here, they have to show that there's clear and convincing evidence of why they made this change. And finally, F, unwarranted by the facts. Let me also give you a quick rundown of what the U.S. Supreme Court has said over the years and bring it up to date in what they've talked about with regard to this section of the Administrative Procedure Act. It says, one, that the APA directs that agency action be set aside if, as we said before, arbitrary or capricious, and requires agencies to engage in, quote, reasoned decision-making. We submit there's no reasoned decision-making here. Number two, the court is to assess whether the decision was, quote, based on a consideration of the relevant factors and whether there has been clear error of judgment. In one of the Supreme Court decisions, they said when determining whether an agency's decision is arbitrary or capricious, we look to certain factors and ask whether the agency, and I'll quote, has relied on factors which Congress has not intended it to consider, entirely failed to consider an important aspect of the problem, often an explanation for its decision that runs counter to the evidence before the agency, or is so implausible that it cannot be ascribed to a difference in view of the product of agency expertise. And finally, the court says the courts are bound to review only the agency's reasoning at the time of the agency action, and it must reject post hoc rationalizations put forward to rehabilitate the agency's reasoning. So far, Administrator Gaynor has only said that this is the new rule. There's been no reasoning behind it, and I would submit that the decision doesn't have a rational basis, and if and when they decide what their rationale is, what I said before, the court doesn't accept post hoc rationalizations, and possibly even if they accepted it, I would submit there's a strong possibility that it's pretextual and that it could be based on the agency or even the president's political and personal interests. Let me bring it up to date, and then I'll conclude. 2 recent U.S. Supreme Court cases that came in challenges out of New York. One, the Docker case, and also with regard to the one in New York, the issue of the citizenship question on the census application, which came from the federal court in New York. Both of these recent actions by the U.S. Supreme Court were found to be arbitrary, capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. So I submit there is precedent for what we're arguing. And let me conclude very simply by saying we, the borough president, myself, and many other New Yorkers, urged Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo to not let this rule change stand. It goes into effect 10 days from now. That's enough time to prepare the papers and ask the federal court for a restraining order. Together, both the city and the state, on behalf of us, the New Yorkers, we need to send a strong, clear message that we in New York will fight back, legally, of course. And as the Governor Cuomo says over and over again over the last 3 months, let's show how New York is New York tough and New York smart. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. And at this point, we would like to open it up to any questions from the press. You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask either the borough president or Mr. Siegel any on-topic questions.
If I can add one more point, I want to thank the Daily News in particular for the last 2 days for writing stories about what FEMA is proposing to do. The media, and in this particular case, the Daily News, serves a huge public service by bringing these issues to the public's attention, allowing elected officials like Eric Adams and as my friend John Lewis used to say, good troubled people like Norman Siegel to speak up and try to encourage the people and the decision makers to do the right thing. We should not let this stand.
Thank you, Norman. And just to add to that, I witnessed over the last few months a slow response to the fast movement of COVID-19. We cannot have a slow response to the potential of a resurgence of COVID-19. It is imperative that on Tuesday after Labor Day weekend, that our lawmakers and our legal team in the city and state immediately take this case to court and challenge the decision by FEMA. And that is why we want to use this weekend to bring it to the attention of our executive branches on the city and state level.
Thank you. Any questions for the borough president or Mr. Siegel?
Hey, Steve Burns here from WCBS Radio. Just real quick for both the borough president and Mr. Siegel. I mean, I know you can't get inside President Trump's head or the FEMA administrator's head, but if you had to ascribe a motive for why this is happening right now, why do you think they're doing this at this point?
I think it's a combination of my belief, looking at the headlines over the last few days. Clearly, there has been a public dispute with the actions of the president towards New York City. In addition to that, let's be clear, This is governed. I'm sorry. Let's be clear that this is the president's FEMA. This is President Trump's FEMA, and you can't weaponize federal agencies to go after political motives and political agendas. I see a political agenda here, and only the courtroom could determine if these actions were appropriate.
If I had to give two words, Steve, it's possibly vindictive. What's the context? 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, a 5-page memo talking about potentially defunding cities that, quote, are anarchistic zones now, lawlessness zones. And then we've got our governor using some strong language back at the president, also making a warning that if you come to New York, as I interpreted, many of us would boo him if he's walking the streets of New York. And understanding the personalities involved here, shortly thereafter, unannounced, according to Senator Schumer, that FEMA makes this announcement. There was no notice or public comment period, which is usually the standard when you're changing rules under the Administrative Procedure Act. None of that. And again, going back to the Daily News, bringing it to everyone's attention, I think that you have to take a hard look at whether or not there's no reasoned rationale for this. It's contrary to scientific evidence. I don't think FEMA will be able, if we go to court, to justify the way the decision to change the rules departs from current guidelines, standards, and procedures. It's not only arbitrary and capricious, it is, I submit, vindictive. And I think you can't dismiss the possibility that this is about political and personal interests on behalf of the federal administration.
Political, punitive, and personal. And that is not how we're going to stop the resurgence of COVID-19.
You know, historically, in 1918, the second wave, which was from October 15th to the end of 1918 into the beginning of 1919, saw in this country the disproportionate percentage of people of the 670,000 Americans who died. This is not the way to attack COVID-19. It's not the way to run a federal government. And we need to, as we know in New York, confront these issues so that we can, as Dr. King always told us, confront and overcome and hold the officials accountable. All of this is present in this issue.
Hey, this is Dave Goldner with the news. How's everybody?
Good, Dave. How are you?
Thank you,
Fantastic,
Dave.
fantastic. Enjoying the weather out here. Question for either one of you. Do you have, I know you're making this announcement today directed at the mayor and the governor. Have you had any interaction with them? Do you have any reason to think that they're amenable to this or not amenable?
I sent communications to the mayor and I sent communications to the attorney general. It was late during the afternoon. I'm sure they will communicate back with me, but I know the mayor indicated earlier in the week that they were willing to sue when the president announced that they were going to deal with the anarchist city or anarchist zone. And I'm hoping that he would also take upon and take a look at what Attorney Siegel has raised in this situation as well.
And Dave, you open a sore point with me, and I'll do this for a lot of advocates in the city. It is not easy to communicate, especially with the mayor of the city of New York, but I don't leave out the governor either. I can document, if necessary, the numerous times that I and other advocates have written to the mayor and sometimes even to the governor in order to make suggestions about what we think they should be doing with regard, A, to COVID-19, to police issues, et cetera. And very often, we don't get even a response. And this is a dynamic that's very troubling. On a personal level, I can go to someone like the borough president in Brooklyn and make a phone call, and I get a response. That doesn't mean he necessarily agrees, but in this case, he agreed, and here we are. I wish both the mayor and the governor would be more accessible and receptive to suggestions about how to approach special issues like COVID-19.
Any other on-topic questions for the borough president or Mr. Siegel before we conclude? Okay, seeing none, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, a recording of this will be uploaded onto YouTube and distributed to all those who need it. For any follow-ups, anything that someone wasn't able to ask, you can email me at jonahallon@brooklynbp.nyc.gov. But we want to thank you all for joining, and to the press, just to echo Mr. Siegel's comment, for continuing to stay on top of this issue, and have a great rest of your day and Labor Day weekend.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Norman.
Thank you.